The photograph arrived the way most forgotten lives do, without ceremony, without witnesses, tucked inside a brittle envelope that smelled faintly of coal dust and old cedar. It surfaced at a small estate sale outside Lexington, mixed among hymnals, ration books, and a stack of tintypes with faces rubbed smooth by decades of handling. On the envelope, in soft pencil, someone had written only, "Martha Dilling, 1921. At first glance, it looks like a simple Appalachian bridal portrait. A young woman in a high-collared dress stands on a warped porch, her veil pinned back as if she didn't have time to fuss with it. Her posture is straight, but not proud, more like someone holding still because she's been told to. The boards beneath her are stained dark from years of wet boots and soot. The light is hard midday, carving sharp shadows beneath her eyes. And then you see it. On the door beside her, just above the latch, there's a painted symbol, a stark geometric mark laid on in something thick and black, like tar. It isn't decorative. It isn't the kind of folk paint you'd expect on a porch door. It looks deliberate, official, like a sign meant to be read by people who already know what it means. That's the first hook. Because in photographs like this, the truth isn't usually in the face. It's in the background. The unnoticed objects. The things people never intended to document. The envelope and the photo made their way to a local researcher named Caleb Voss, a man who catalogs lost places in the coal counties, company towns that collapsed, hollows that emptied, churchyards that slid into the brush. He'd seen hundreds of porch portraits. He'd never seen a symbol like that on a door. Not in 1921. Not anywhere. He started with the basics. Where exactly was this taken? The porch wood looks like company-milled pine. The door is plain, mass-produced, catalog hardware, not handmade. There's a faint silhouette in the far background that could be a tipple or loading structure, the kind that turns a valley into a machine. Everything about the setting whispers coal camp, a place where houses weren't homes so much as assignments. The name Martha Dilling is common enough to be dangerous. It could belong to a dozen women across 3 states. But the photo itself offers small anchors. The cut of the dress, the style of the porch rail, the type of latch. Early 1920s fits. Appalachia fits. What doesn't fit is that symbol. Too crisp, too intentional, too much like a label. Caleb shared a scan with 2 people, an archivist at a regional university and an antique dealer who specializes in fraternal memorabilia. Odd fellows, masons, union badges, lodge pins. Both responded the same way in different words. It resembles a mark of belonging or a mark of warning. One suggested it could be a property designation used by company management. Another mentioned old public health quarantines in mining camps, homes marked during outbreaks, sometimes with symbols that never made it into newspapers because they made the town look bad. But the most unsettling possibility came from a retired surveyor who had worked land records in eastern Kentucky. He stared at the image for a long time, then said, almost casually, "That looks like something they'd paint when a house was slated to be cleared. Not demolished, cleared. Like you're not supposed to go in. Like what's inside is already considered gone." If that's true, then the question changes. This stops being a wedding portrait. It becomes a timestamp. Martha standing on the threshold of a place already marked for erasure. And that's where the mystery tightens. Why would a bride pose beside a door carrying a warning? Was the symbol put there before the photo? Or after, altered later, a cruel edit made in paint? Was Martha meant to be a message to someone else? Or did she simply live in a world where signs like that were so common, people stopped asking what they meant? By the end of the first night, Caleb found the detail that turned curiosity into dread. Along the lower edge of the door, half hidden by shadow, there's a faint smear, as if the paint was applied quickly with a rag by someone in a hurry. Not a careful hand, a working hand. And if the symbol was placed in haste, it suggests urgency. Somebody needed that door marked before anyone asked questions. So we're left with one photograph, one name, and one symbol that refuses to be explained by coincidence. Who marked Martha's door? Company men, county officials, church elders, or someone closer? What did it announce? And why, a century later, Does it still feel like the picture is warning us to keep our distance? Caleb did what anyone does when a photograph refuses to behave. He tried to pin it down to a place that couldn't lie. He started with the porch itself. He enlarged the scan until the wood grain turned into ridges and valleys, then compared the mill cut pattern to known company house builds from eastern Kentucky and southwest Virginia. The latch mattered too. Cheap, catalog metal, the kind bought in bulk. A coal historian at a small museum in Harlan took one look and said the same thing Caleb had been circling. This isn't a farmhouse. It's a house issued to someone. So Caleb shifted from romance to bureaucracy. If a company assigned the home, then a company might also mark it. At the county clerk's office, the marriage ledgers for 1921 were intact. Mostly. Names, dates, ministers, fees. There were Dillings, there were Marthas. There was no clean match for Martha Dilling. That could mean a private ceremony. It could mean a different county. Or it could mean what clerks sometimes did when a name was complicated. They filed it under a spelling that flattened a person into paperwork. The university archivist, Evelyn Hart, pulled a stack of public health circulars from 1918-1922, warnings sent to mining camps during influenza flare-ups and diphtheria scares. In some camps, houses were tagged or marked so inspectors could track outbreaks. When Caleb sent her the symbol, she didn't confirm it. She hesitated. "It's too designed," she said. Quarantine marks were usually letters, numbers, chalk. This feels like an emblem. That pushed him toward the antique dealer Nolan Rusk, who had spent a lifetime matching forgotten symbols to forgotten organizations. Nolan laid out lodge insignias, union stamps, coal company brands, even old rail line waymarks. For a day, they chased a promising lead. The symbol resembled a stylized mark used on crate stencils, 2 chevrons and a dot, sometimes tied to regional suppliers. It was seductive, practical, non-mythic, and wrong. Nolan found the same chevrons on a 1920s hardware catalog page, not as an emblem, but as a decorative flourish on a stove advertisement. A coincidence of geometry. A dead end that reminded Caleb how badly the mind wants patterns to be answers. The surveyor's comment about houses being cleared stayed lodged in Caleb's chest. So he hunted for the paper trail of erasure. Eviction lists, condemnation notices, camp relocations. In the microfilm room, the local newspaper was full of what it always printed: church socials, mine injuries written as brief inconveniences, a parade of accidents without outrage. But tucked between ads was a notice from late 1921. A coal operator requesting bids to remove unfit structures in a particular hollow. No names, just a line of indifference. Caleb went back to the photograph with that word, unfit, and zoomed in until the pixels broke apart. That's when the second detail surfaced, the one you don't see until you're already haunted. Near the baseboard, just inside the doorframe, there's a faint rectangle, paper, tacked up and later torn down. The edges are still there like scars. It's positioned at eye level, slightly angled as if slapped on fast. Not a family decoration, not a wreath, a notice. Evelyn suggested a photography conservator who could read what cameras captured but eyes missed. Under digital contrast and simulated light raking, the paper remnant gave up the ghost of ink. 2 lines, blocky, official. The top line looked like a heading. The bottom line shorter, like an order. Caleb wanted it to say, condemned. He wanted certainty, even if it was ugly. But the letters refused to resolve cleanly. The only thing the analysis could prove was this: someone posted something on that door, and someone later removed it. Then came the contradiction that made the room go quiet. In a 1920 census sheet from the same region, Evelyn found a Martha living not with family, but as a boarder in a camp household tied to the company. Same approximate age. Different last name, close enough to be a clerk's mistake. Beside it, another note in the margin: delicate. A soft word people used when they didn't want to say what they meant. Caleb took the photo to a retired midwife who'd grown up in coal country. She stared at Martha's face, the stiffness in the shoulders, the tightness around the mouth. "She's not posing like a bride," the woman said. She's posing like somebody who's being documented. And suddenly the symbol on the door stopped looking like folklore or ornament. It started looking like a stamp, an administrative decision made visible in paint. If that door was marked, and a notice was posted and records don't want to hold her name, then the photo isn't commemorating a beginning. It's recording a moment right before the place and the woman standing beside it were made easy to deny. By the third week, the photograph had turned into a small obsession shared by a handful of people who didn't usually agree on anything. A coal historian, a university archivist, an antique dealer, and one exhausted researcher with a stubborn belief that places leave paper trails if you press hard enough. Caleb's next move was to prove the symbol wasn't mysterious at all, just misread. The simplest explanation was still the most attractive: a company mark, a coal operator's shorthand, a code for foremen and rent collectors. If that were true, the symbol would appear somewhere else: on crates, on tool ledgers, on eviction notes, on the kind of paperwork that never makes it into family albums. So Evelyn widened the search beyond marriage records and newspapers. She pulled coal company circulars, camp rules, payroll stubs, anything with printed iconography. Nolan did the same in his own way, laying out a tabletop museum of lodge pins and union insignias and saying, again and again, it wants to be an emblem. For 2 days, they chased a new lead that felt almost too perfect. In a 1921 shipping ledger from a regional supplier, Evelyn found a crude stamp, 2 chevrons and a dot used to mark returned goods. The geometry matched just enough to raise hope. Returned, unfit, cleared. It all lined up like a story desperate to be solved. Then the ledger broke their hearts. The stamp was printed, neat, standardized. Martha's symbol was hand-painted, uneven at the edges, heavy with brush drag, the kind of mark you make when you're standing on a porch with bad light and no time. The supplier stamp wasn't their answer. It was just another example of how the world recycles shapes. Caleb went back to the photo with fresh suspicion. If the symbol wasn't a brand, then it might be a signal, meant less for ownership and more for instruction. He asked the photography conservator to do one more pass, not on the paper remnant, but on Martha herself. "Forget the romance," he said. "Tell me what's actually on her." When the enhanced crop arrived, the room went quiet. Along Martha's left cuff, where the lace should have been clean, there was a faint stitched marking, 2 letters, almost lost in the fabric's age. CH, and pinned near her waistline, half hidden by a fold, was the ghost of a small tag. String through cloth, the outline of a rectangle where paper once sat. Not jewelry, not a bouquet, a label. It didn't prove she wasn't a bride, but it proved something more disturbing. She was being processed. Evelyn recognized the initials before anyone else could speak, not as a name, too impersonal for that, but as a category she'd seen in welfare documents from the period. County home, poor farm, receiving house. The place the county used when people were sick, broke, orphaned, delicate, or inconvenient. And suddenly the symbol on the door stopped resembling folklore and started resembling administration. They dug into county minutes and public health correspondence from 1920-1922, the kind of writing that treats human lives like inventory. There, buried in a stack of routine decisions, was a reference to an isolation cottage maintained on the edge of a coal hollow, used during outbreaks when camps didn't want sickness near payroll. The wording was careful, sanitized, no photographs attached, no names listed. But there was one detail that hit like a fist. Doors were to be marked to prevent unnecessary entry, and the marking was to be distinct and visible. Not a skull and crossbones, not a word, a mark, something that could be recognized by officials and ignored by everyone else. Caleb drove into the eastern Kentucky hills with the photo printed on thick paper, the way detectives used to carry faces. He wasn't hunting for Martha anymore. He was hunting for the porch. He found the hollow by following absence, a bend in the road where older map lines suggested a cluster of houses that no longer existed, a scar on a hillside where coal had been bitten out and left raw, a stand of trees that looked too young for the land, Behind a curtain of brush, stone piers still held the shape of a foundation. Rusted nails glittered in the dirt like teeth. And in the weeds, half buried, he found the only thing that felt like an answer that could be held. A warped plank, once part of a doorframe, bearing a flake of black paint in a familiar angle. Not the full symbol, just the tail of it, like proof the photograph wasn't staging a myth. It was recording procedure. Back at Evelyn's desk, one last contradiction snapped into place. The marriage ledgers didn't fit because maybe there was no marriage. The bridal white wasn't proof of vows. It was proof of laundry, of institutional cloth, of a woman dressed in the cleanest thing available for a camera that might be documenting her before she was moved. If Martha was standing beside an isolation door, then the photograph isn't a celebration. It's a warning frozen in time, and the question becomes heavier, more specific, harder to look away from. Why would someone take a portrait of a 22-year-old woman at the threshold of a place the county wanted marked, restricted, and forgotten, unless they needed evidence that she had been there? Because once you start seeing the symbol as a system, not a superstition, you realize the most frightening thing about the door isn't what it keeps out. It's what it was designed to keep in. The last piece didn't come from a dramatic confession. It came from a folder that had been mislabeled for decades. Public health correspondence filed under general improvements, as if sickness and poverty were just another road project. Evelyn found it in a county archive box that smelled of damp paper and disinfectant. Inside was a typed circular dated late 1921, addressed to camp supervisors, a county physician, and responsible parties. The language was polite, careful, and brutal in what it assumed, that people would comply, that the public didn't need to know, and that fear could be managed with paint. There it was in plain ink, instructions for an isolation dwelling used during outbreaks and delicate conditions, and a note that the entrance was to be marked with a distinct symbol so that unnecessary entry could be prevented. Not a word, not a number, a mark, simple enough to repeat, specific enough to recognize. 2 chevrons, a dot, a door that could be read like a verdict. The symbol in Martha's photograph wasn't superstition, it was policy, and the initials on her cuff, CH, weren't a lover's embroidery or a family monogram. In the same folder, a ledger page listed abbreviations used for receiving and housing. CH appeared again and again beside short notes, sent by deputy, transfer approved, keep separate, no visitors, county home, poor farm, the place that absorbed the inconvenient, the sick, the penniless, the unmarried pregnant, the women who didn't have people, the people whose stories were easier to file than to hear. Caleb read the documents twice, then went back to the photo and looked at Martha's face as if seeing it for the first time. The stiffness wasn't bridal nerves. It was containment. The careful way her hands held still wasn't posing. It was obedience. Trained, exhausted, familiar. What happened next wasn't clean, but it was traceable. A week later, Evelyn located a death register entry from early 1922 with a name that was almost Martha's, spelled wrong. Age off by a year, birthplace vague. Cause listed in the soft language of the time. Decline, lung trouble. The kind of phrasing used when a community didn't want a disease attached to its payroll. The burial line pointed to a cemetery that no longer had legible stones, a place where bodies were recorded but not remembered. The marriage ledger never held her because no one needed her as a bride on paper. The photograph did the job the paperwork couldn't. It proved she stood at the door, under the mark, in the frame of a system that could move her without witnesses. The hardest question, why take the portrait at all, ended up having the simplest answer. Documentation isn't always made to honor someone. Sometimes it's made to protect an institution. In coal country, responsibility was a hot stone nobody wanted to hold. If a woman got sick in a camp house, was it the company's problem? If she vanished into the county home, was it the county's? If she died, whose failure was it? A photograph can be a receipt, a way of saying, she was here, then she wasn't. Caleb returned to the hollow one more time before winter. The foundation stones sat under frost. The hills were quiet in the way places get when they've outlasted the people who worked them. He stood where the porch would have been and held the print at arm's length, matching angles, aligning the door that no longer existed with the emptiness where it used to stand. In that moment, the image stopped being a mystery and became an indictment. A young woman dressed in white at the entrance to a marked house, the sign of isolation beside her like a seal. A Noiva dos Apalaches, not because she was celebrated, but because she was staged, cleaned up for the camera, then filed away. What remains unsolved is the human part. Who placed Martha there? Who told her to stand still? Who owned the camera? The photo's edge suggests a second figure cropped out, someone close enough to be family or official enough to be in charge. Someone whose name never needed to be written on an envelope. And maybe that's the final cruelty of the frame. The system is visible, but the hands that operated it stay just outside the border. Today, the symbol is no longer on a door. It's on a piece of paper in an archive box, and on a photograph that refuses to fade quietly. Martha Dilling's life may have been reduced to a misspelling in a register, but the mark beside her is stubborn proof that her disappearance wasn't a ghost story. It was procedure. A century later, the porch is gone. The hollow is reclaimed by brush and the institutions have new names. But the photograph still does what it was always meant to do. It shows you a boundary between the living and the removed, between the public story and the private disposal. And once you've seen the symbol, you can't unsee what it really says. Not keep out, keep quiet.